We would like to acknowledge the indigenous lands and the cultures of New York. We honor the land as the creator intended in that we commit to keep it clean and support efforts to make it safe for all, not just some. We can show honor to the native keepers of the land by recognizing the value of their cultures and by learning the truth of their history and how it provided the foundation for this country as we experience it today. It's always important to acknowledge and dig deeper into the history. And we'd like to open space that if you do come into knowledge of the exact nations and cultures of indigenous and native peoples for the places that you reside, that you share that with us, share it with your teams. Let's get more specific and intentional on the families and communities that we make space to acknowledge so that we may be acknowledged as well. Now, for our guest speaker in the Learning Cafe that you've come to see and hopefully invited others, because this is going to be a great informative session. With over 20 years of experience in group facilitation and LGBTQIA services, Lyndon Cudlitz delivers customized training and technical assistance for educators, healthcare providers, nonprofits, businesses, and government agencies. List probably goes on. His work encourages clients and communities to make institutional shifts to improve interpersonal relationships and to examine the beliefs individuals have internalized about ourselves and others, and as well as internalized about themselves. His background includes children's rock climbing instructions, sexual health education, and founding and directing youth leadership programs in Maine, New York, and Missouri. When not in front of an audience like he's going to be in front of you today, digitally, or climbing rock walls around the country, he can be found volunteering at summer camp in upstate New York. Please, Learning Cafe virtual audience, hit those emojis, show your virtual love and appreciation for Lyndon Cudlitz.
Thanks so much, Elijah. I appreciate it. I always love getting to speak here at these events and with all of you. So we're going to get right into it. You got my bio. I'm not going to bother giving you any more of that information so that I can prioritize getting you some good information today. To start us off, I want to say that one of the roles that I have with ECLC is that I'm the contracted facilitator for an LGBTQ affinity group that ECLC holds for folks that are within its network around the state. So I get to do that. I come in here with that information, but I also have had the pleasure of getting to facilitate many different affinity groups over the years. So I'm using that knowledge and bringing in some knowledge from other folks that are experts in the field, legally and like in HR. So let's give you that. I want to start out by kind of giving us a landscape of what these different things are. So on the screen right now, I've got 4 different kinds of groups for us. We're going to be focusing only on 2, but I wanted to kind of give you this to start with. Informal affinity groups and formal affinity groups, right, are often looking inward. They are looking at kind of their own members' experiences, their own members' needs. Whereas those employee resource groups, business resource groups that we might see less in nonprofits, but more kind of in the corporate world, are often looking outward, meaning they're focusing on the organization rather than the individuals within this particular group. Those informal groups are kind of similar to social clubs. They certainly are people with like a shared experience, a shared identity, and they arose out of things like the civil rights movement, right? Because there were social, economic, safety, and other health needs for groups of people. And so then we saw the need for having individualized space just for folks, right? Informal groups kind of then led to implementing this in organizations, in communities, in a more formal way. So when we look at our nonprofits and our businesses, schools, those formal affinity groups have acknowledgement from an organization, an agency, a business. I'm going to use the term organization for us today. And similarly have like a shared life experience or identity among those members. And we'll talk a little bit later about like who gets to attend and who doesn't. Formal affinity groups within organizations actually are the things that led to this employee resource group. And from employee resource groups, we got business resource groups. So ERGs have more sponsorship, so a more formal connection with an organization, while still kind of sharing those life experiences, identities, and depending on the group, kind of aspiring allies to be a part of it as well. The difference when we get to business resource group is that rather than focusing on like diversity inclusion type initiatives, they might be focused more on like shared business goals. So less identity based individuals there and more people who share the business goals of the organization. I'm going to spell some more of this out for you in a bit. We're going to focus on just those two on the left, the employee resource group and the kind of more formal affinity groups today. So I gotta tell you, there is so much information I could give you here, and it's a little tough to encapsulate it. But one of the things that I do find is that organizations, professionals, folks who are involved in ERGs and affinity groups have some different definitions for what this looks like and have some different ways of making the distinction between the two. So I'm going to give you what most people say. I'm going to give you with what aligns mostly with what I've seen and experienced and advocate for. So with our affinity groups, these are often smaller groups. They are more informal. And again, are made up of people that have a shared cultural background, a shared identity background, a shared experience in some way. And I'll give you examples of this in a little bit. Oftentimes, the influence that these groups have on an organization is more informal. It is more subtle. It's less tangible, but it really impacts the individuals in the group. And when the impact is on the individuals, they're working in an environment that kind of changes and shapes the culture around them. Often affinity groups have really minimal connection to and sponsorship from an organization compared to our employee resource groups. So our ERGs, often more large, more structured format. They are kind of structured and developed by the organization rather by the individuals. And this is a little bit different in the language, where affinity groups are based on shared cultural identity, backgrounds, etc. ERGs are primarily based on that. So there's a little bit more breadth here in who gets involved. Often these have an intentional and structured impact on initiatives going on within an organization. And those are often initiatives related to access and equity and ensuring that both the workers and who they serve are getting what they need. It often formally tackles issues of underrepresentation within leadership or within the employee base or within the people they serve as well. So this is often sponsored directly by HR or an executive team. So again, smaller, informal, less connection, larger, more formal, stronger connection. Those affinity groups are often very voluntary. People decide they're going to show up because they want to, and it's not something that's asked of them. Those are very people-oriented, again, that kind of looking inward. And they tend to be accountable to really the employees around them. So they are looking at what do the employees need? What do we need from each other? Who do we essentially report to? Less the organization in a formal way and more how do we best serve our community and culture here? These also tend to be less visible to the organization as a whole, meaning not every employee might have this on their radar all the time or know that these are part of what's going on in the organization, which means promo is really important. These will also have perhaps a limited or no budget from the organization. It means that when affinity groups, for example, bring me in as a speaker, they often are working with a super small budget or they're putting forward the money themselves to be able to have a guest speaker in, or they have to really push for those the ability to have somebody. With our ERGs, again, still voluntary, but this might be something that is assigned to somebody. So I want to be clear that I think that should be a consensual process, right? You can ask, hey, would you like to serve on this group? Here's why I would love to have you. Be straightforward. I'm going to say this just so folks know. when we ask people to be part of certain initiatives within an organization, particularly when it's related to something identity specific, it's really easy to tokenize our employees, and we want to be careful about that. My approach to things is if I want somebody to sit on a panel, if I want somebody to be part of a group, if I want them to be involved in this because of something about their identity, I am straight up about it. But I'm also giving thought to everything else they bring to the table, not just this part of their race or sexuality, etc. So I will say to somebody, hey, um, we have this going on. Here's why I think you're a great fit. I also want to be transparent that we're looking for more Black voices on that committee, right? And let them know that they don't have to take it. So this is, again, often more organization oriented. They're thinking about the organization. They're accountable to the organization's overall goals, and they're seen as part of it, as opposed to, I guess, you could say like a side project that affinity groups sometimes are. And they have more direct access to senior leadership, whereas affinity groups really function on their own. So what are the benefits to some of these? Our affinity groups often are really creating a sense of belonging for people, right? It's a way to feel more connected to each other. It's a way to feel less alone. I have absolutely worked for organizations where I've shown up and I think I am the only transgender person there. And that feels really lonely. And I have to be honest, doesn't want to make me stick around very long. But if I know that there is a group for folks who have similar experiences to me, whatever that is we're talking about, then I can feel more connected to them, which of course does things like improve my mental health, and those things increase productivity, and that also keeps me around longer, right? Affinity groups allow for folks to have some personal growth and to crowdsource problem solving together. So, for example, in the group that I run through ECLC, our LGBTQ group, that LGBTQ closed group often talks about kind of how different issues are coming up for them in the workplace. And that might be about, hey, I want to come out to my employer, but I don't know how to, or I'm hearing these homophobic things going on. Can anybody help me problem solve how to deal with that? So this allows people to have more shared conversation and also share the joy. One of the things we talk about in our group is like, what do you love about being LGBTQ? What are the good things? Um, it allows us to process when there are hard current events going on, right? So again, as an example from my work, I was working at an LGBTQ center in Albany, New York, when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened. And on the downside, everybody was calling us and we were kind of processing it ourselves. But on the plus side, I was working among a group of people that I shared a connection with and we could mourn together. If I had been working for another agency at that time, I may not have been provided that space. Our executive director came in and said, y'all can decide whether you want to go home or not. Please take care of you today. What can I do to help you? And I don't necessarily know that that would have happened had I been the only LGBTQ person that I knew of in an organization, or if I didn't have a shared space with other people. So having that shared space is really, really key. I am a big supporter of affinity groups. And actually, something I want to take a moment to note here is that we're talking about this largely in the context of the workplace and in organizations. But the concept of an affinity group is a common occurrence in like kind of community-based things and in schools. So I, for a number of years, was contracted to run a transgender and non-binary affinity group for a boarding school. And I met with those students. It provided them a space to talk about the issues that were coming up for them. It was confidential. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Um, and really provide them the kind of support space that they needed. The purpose of the group was not just social, but it was really concentrating on supporting each other and kind of digging into more about those identities. It provided me an opportunity to be a mentor to a group of youth. So I really like to get to see affinity groups. And we see sometimes, right, affinity-based organizations. We have Girls Inc., for example, who has done some incredible work over the years around the country. And I used to work for in Maine years ago. And that is an organization that is designed for girls and centers girls. Why? Well, because we know that there are extra resources and supports that they need. So keep that in mind when we talk about uh, kind of how we plan out doing these groups. Talk about our ERGs for a second. Again, I will say that these and certainly BRGs are more common in kind of the business realm of things, but we certainly see them in our nonprofits as well. One of the best things about this for the company is that it actually demonstrates that it is following through on their DEI initiatives, for example, and other types of things. I don't mean that I want it to be virtue signaling. I don't want it to be like, hey, we're doing it. Aren't we great? But we recognize that by having these groups, it looks, it, it weighs positively on the reputation of the organization. It also means that you've got more diverse voices that are coming together and providing their perspectives to the organization in particular and strategic ways, which also then helps with decision making and helps with driving innovation, or helps them reach new communities. And maybe if those voices weren't otherwise in senior leadership, that wouldn't be happening. So this also is a area for professional growth as opposed to the other one that's a little bit more personal, right? And the benefit there is that with the professional growth, senior leadership, for example, might be able to see this in a way that they may not be able to see that work being done in an affinity group. So this is another opportunity for employees to show their drive, their initiative, their creativity, and how they work together as a team. It also can provide spaces for formalized mentorship. Some ERGs implement mentor programs so that, all right, folks who've been in the organization longer with a similar identity to somebody else who's brand new can kind of mentor them in the organization. That might be, again, within like a different level of leadership. It might be a new person versus old person thing. So lots of different ways that can happen. And I think the informal mentorship tends to happen in the affinity group, right? Seeing ourselves represented in each other is a really, really important thing. Where these kind of overlap mostly are the ways that it improves confidence, both so in ourselves, right? If we are connecting with people, we're growing, we're being part of something that builds our own confidence. But it also allows us to have more confidence in the organization, in our employer. Wow, they're allowing us to do this. They support this. They believe in this. They want to hear what we have and what we need, or they want to provide us the space to talk. I will support that organization more, which means that will attract new talent and it will increase retention, right? Happy employees stick around. So if you think about a college tour, for example, right, they go around, they show you all the different things on campus. They might show you the different student clubs and different centers because they're trying to attract college students to that college. Basically, we want to do the same thing here. We want employers to be communicating to the public, to their prospective employees in particular, that these groups exist and how they support them, which ones of them are there. So I will tell you that if I'm going to go take a job with somebody else, if they have affinity groups or they have ERGs, I am more likely to accept an offer that they give me than somewhere else. And again, I'm more likely to stick around. So those are some of the benefits. There we go. I want to talk about some examples of these and then get into some of the legal considerations because I know that's where people often have a lot of questions and kind of want some like more clarity. So for our groups, to get a little bit more detail on this, I really appreciate this quote from Indeed that describes groups as having a unifying characteristic, usually something that's traditionally underrepresented, and that's a really key piece, traditionally underrepresented, or can make people in that group feel isolated. So the membership of groups is often having a unifying characteristic that is otherwise underrepresented within the organization, within the community, or otherwise experiences targeting, oppression, etc. And I'll give a couple exceptions to that in a bit. Some examples of these are often groups for based on identity for groups of like employees of color. For example, there's places have Black employee networks. My favorite that I came across in the past is an affinity group that names itself HOLA for the Hispanic and Latinx Organization of Leaders in Action. Really cute acronym. So sometimes in smaller organizations, affinity groups that are based on racial identity may kind of lump everybody together. So lump all BIPOC individuals, Black, Indigenous, and the people of color together. And other organizations that are bigger may be able to break some of that out to kind of connect with people's individual needs. And I want to say, before I forget this, that if an organization has multiple affinity groups, multiple ERGs, it's really important that these don't meet at the same time. We don't want people to have to choose between being involved with one part of their identity versus another part of their experience. So ensure that these are at different times so that people aren't in a place of having to choose. We've seen generational based ones. Right now, a common one is Gen X because folks are in the like 44 to 65-ish range, somewhere in there. We see ones that are LGBTQ specific. Google in particular has a large group. And I think they function as an ERG, not an affinity group. But one of my dear friends is involved with the leadership with that one. You'll notice that there are a number of organizations that really wrap their name right into their affinity groups or ERGs. Amazon is another one. In fact, I'm going to drop some examples of these groups into the chat for us. There you go. Pride at Google, I've seen ones that, again, in a bigger organization might specifically separate out a space for transgender and non-binary folks because we understand that their needs are different than their non-trans LGBTQ counterparts. We sometimes see ones for first generation or for migrants. One from a law company is First Gen Forward. I really appreciated that name. We see some for people with disabilities. I've seen ones that are specific to neurodiverse individuals. We've seen some that are for veterans and their families. Amazon has this, they call it Warriors at Amazon, which I thought was great. And I was telling Elijah before we got started that as I was looking through the list of Amazon's 13 different affinity groups that they have, again, they make sure that Amazon is in the name of most of those. And so they have one that's called Amazon Women in Engineering, which I thought was complicated and funny. And it means that maybe we need to be a little strategic about what names we do or do not use. So I'll let you decide whether you like that one or not. We can also see ones that are designed for women specifically. Again, like Amazon Women in Engineering is a really specific one there. We've seen them named things like Women's Success and Empowerment. Choosing the name of an affinity group or an ERG, I think should be a collaborative process. It should be one that is not just solo decisions, but really takes everybody into account. We've also seen some organizations that are based on other characteristics or other goals. So ERGs that are named body positive peers, right? So they focus on ensuring that they're tackling issues around fat phobia in the organization, or that they're really creating a space for every body to exist in this place. One of the things that I've seen an ERG do that focuses on that is make sure that the chairs in their waiting room were widened. They had a couple different options. And another one that made sure that the chairs in their waiting room could actually take a higher weight capacity so that people who are coming in could sit down just like everybody else. So it's really neat to have people who are geared towards thinking about those types of things involved in an ERG and thinking strategically about how they can encompass that into an organization. And we've seen other ones. I think this one's popping up a lot more and more over the years, but some focusing on physical health, some focusing on mental health and well-being, which is great, right? And maybe that is a group of people who are experiencing issues around mental illness or have family members who are, or maybe it's just people who really want to care about mental health. Okay, so those are a few examples. The ones, the links I gave you in the chat come up with have a few more for you, so you can check out those organizations. And I want to say that I picked organizations that also are pretty big and well known because I want to demystify this for folks. I want to make sure people understand that this is a really common thing among many different types of groups and organizations. So I say that because one of the big questions that comes up is like, okay, but is this legal? And the answer is yes. And there are things that we can also do to mitigate potential risk there. I want to say that the Department of Labor laws around this are complicated and difficult. And I'm going to give you some resources at the end of this. I want you to do a little bit more research on it. And I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice, but I can give you some thoughts here on how to mitigate potential risk, or at least be able to give that to your employer if you're thinking of starting one, so that your employer can maybe settle their nervousness a little bit. Number one, ensure that affinity groups are voluntary, that people aren't being told to go there, that they just get to go if they want. And what I say is consensual involvement in ERGs. I think it is okay to ask employees to participate, to tell them why we might like them to, but ensure that they have consented to that, and that they aren't being pressured or coerced into it. I will also say that if this becomes a part of somebody's job in an ERG, or they are leading an affinity group, I think it's helpful to adjust somebody's job description so that that's in there, or at least offer that to them. Number two, treat all groups equally, meaning they get the same supports financially or in connection to leadership, and they have the same rules that apply to them. And this will become important in a moment here. Number three, an organization needs to set really clear policy and guidelines. And I can't underscore this enough. Please, if you're thinking about developing ERGs and oh my gosh, I almost said allyship groups, affinity groups, really sit down and take some time with HR, with a lawyer, with people who are invested in this conversation, and develop clear policies and guidelines. Some of the resources I'm going to give you a sense of how to do that. There's even a template for you. You can check that out. But largely, these are going to encompass a statement of purpose. Why do we have these groups? They can be guidelines on how to create the group, which means a group has to follow those guidelines in order to be accepted and approved. Similar to how in a high school clubs very often have to follow a set of guidelines for when they apply to be a new official club. And if they're not following those guidelines, then the answer is no right now, until you get your stuff together a little bit more. Give information on what is and what is not allowed. And this can be, I think, where people are the most concerned. If we let one kind of group, what happens if somebody wants to do a hate group? And that can be mitigated by ensuring that every group is in alignment with the purpose and policy. So the Society for Human Resources Management says they encourage you to ask this question, like, are other affinity groups and mechanisms already in place that serve the need that is being addressed by this request? So let's say an organization has all men in their senior leadership, and there are women in the organization, but they're not in the senior leadership. Well, maybe there is a women's affinity group or ERG. Fantastic. Maybe then there's some men who are upset that women are having their own space, and they say, well, we want a men's affinity group or ERG. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but the question is, are you in alignment with the purposes of these ERGs, and is your need being met somewhere else? The reality is, you're not underrepresented in the organization, And that's one of our qualifying factors for accepting and approving an ERG or an affinity group, right? What is the need that men do have within the organization? If there's a different need there, let's talk about it. Sometimes organizations will say we like blanket rule, we don't allow any political groups, or we don't allow any religious groups. I have to say I'm a little mixed, particularly on the religious one, because there are a lot of religious minorities in this country, folks who often feel pretty alone in their organizations, right? I was part of an organization. I was the only Jewish person, and I had to take Christmas off, but I wasn't really allowed to take any Jewish holidays off. And that sucked. But if there was other people that I could connect with, or other people who were dedicated to looking at religious equity in the organization, then I would have had a space to maybe offer some suggestions or request my needs and not feel so alone and singular in that. We can also have organizations name out like what are their reporting requirements, what's the relationship with the organization. So for example, actually in the next couple slides, I'll share with you how I do that with ECLC. Number 4, okay, I'm gonna actually back up for a second. I believe strongly in affinity groups in part because traditionally affinity groups are designed as for people pertaining to a particular, again, unifying factor only, meaning it does exclude other people. But remember, there are reasons for that. So I deeply believe in that. I think that is actually the best approach to affinity groups. When people of a shared, like marginalized identity get a chance to be together without anybody like listening in, so they just get to be, it is huge, right? So if that is a concern in the legal risk, which I'll show in a moment, it shouldn't necessarily be, consider having an open membership for something, but be specific about who it is designed for. So this group is designed to center the needs of LGBTQ people, and our aspiring allies are welcome, right? So this is designed for this. Anybody can attend, but we focus on the needs of this population, and we focus on the voices of this population because that's who's underrepresented in the organization. If you're like, oh, Lyndon, I don't know, I still feel some legal feelings about this. First of all, I'm going to give you SHRM's information, but I'm also going to show you that even law firms have affinity groups. This law firm has an LGBTQ plus affinity group. They have a first gen one, and they have one for lawyers of color. And here's an interesting little tidbit that I noticed on their website. You'll notice that in the LGBTQ group, they are specific that we welcome like allied folks, this says allied colleagues is the next line, for that group. So everybody's welcome. Again, we focus on LGBTQ folks. I know, fantastic name, right? For the folks in the chat who are naming this. But when you look at the lawyers of color group, it seems to be indicating that only staff of color get to participate in that group, which I think is fantastic and great. I'm not threatened by that as a white person. I want people to have a space to share their needs together and to get their needs met and support one another without having to worry about me being around for it. I'm not threatened by that. But you'll notice that it doesn't say that like it welcomes aspiring allies. And this is a affinity group for a law firm, just as an example for you. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about collaboration, and then I'll give you some examples from what I do as well. I really support collaboration among affinity groups in an organization. So it means that you can work together to put on events or certain programs. You can focus on crossover issues. So maybe maybe the LGBTQ group and the veterans group wants to get together and host a panel on the experiences of LGBTQ vets. Fantastic. You can work on initiatives together, but we can also function as accountability partners. hey, the LGBTQ group wants to understand how we can better address racism in our community. And the Lawyers of Color group is like, hey, we want to do a better job of supporting our LGBTQ people of color in our lives. So we get to work together and ask each other what they need, and tell each other when maybe we're making some mistakes and have those honest conversations together. The other type of collaboration that can happen is when we have aspiring ally groups. And you'll notice that I say aspiring ally and not just allies flat out, because as much as I can appreciate when people like tell me that they're an ally and it tells me that they're trying, I get to decide whether they are really in a place of allyship or not. I get to decide as an LGBTQ person whether somebody is really showing up in their allyship for me or not. So it's why I use aspiring ally groups. With these are often groups that are from non-underrepresented groups, right? So represented groups, groups that are not experiencing marginalization, oppression, etc., with the focus on the uplifting, the support of those who are underrepresented. So if, for example, we have a group of white folks who want to come together and say, hey, we would like to, as white people, work on supporting the needs of the BIPOC group, and we want to do a better job of digging into our own the things we've been taught about race and racism as white people. We want to do that in support of another group. It's not a white pride group. It is a let me help understand myself and let me help support others. It allows us to do that without causing harm. It allows us to kind of do some of that work as white people, for example, without people of color having to hear the mistakes that we make. That can be pretty hurtful. And then those groups can serve as accountability partners. I also want to say, I think that when groups like that form, before you officially make that, you probably should check in with the leaders of the BIPOC group to make sure that they're down for this group happening and talk about how they want that to happen. If I am facilitating a white anti-racism space, it is because people of color have asked me to do that, or we've had deep conversations about how I can better support that, and we've agreed this is a way that it should happen. So those accountability partners can happen like with the other groups, but then even within your groups, you're accountability partners to each other. I can show up to a group that is, I'm just gonna say designed for men, and we as men can figure out how we are better supporting the women in leadership in our organization. If that is the purpose of our group, great. I can come to that group to strategize a little bit. I might say, hey, I made a mistake. Can you help me figure out the best way to approach this? And that's a place I can do that more formally, right? So those are my perspectives on collaboration groups. All right, I'm going to go through our kind of examples from my group, and I'm going to cut into our question time just a little bit with that. So I'm contracted again to run ECLC's LGBTQ discussion group. So one thing that they've chosen to do is to contract out that facilitation for virtual sessions instead of doing it in-house. And ECLC is in the position of that is not just a group that is open to like ECLC staff. That is for, again, their entire member network. So we focus on issues pertaining to LGBTQ topics and people and families. And we try to tie in particular, how do these relate to being in the childcare or like early education field? So we meet monthly, once a month, and each quarter we have 2 closed sessions and 1 open session. So part of why we do that is because it meets the needs of those aspiring allies without necessarily causing trauma and emotional labor on the LGBTQ people who want the closed space. Queer and trans folks deserve a closed space. It's really important for us to have. And we want to make sure that allies are kind of getting their needs met too. I will say I do have people sign up for this believing that it's a training. It's not a training, it's a discussion group. You're doing some work here. And LGBTQ people can decide whether they go to that open session or not. That's up to them. It also means that it is a place where people who are not ready or out to their employer, people who are not ready to share that information for whatever reason, or maybe their workplace is hostile, they can come to an open session without an employer believing that they are LGBTQ. I do welcome questioning people into an LGBTQ group, and I'm very clear about that in the promo. This also means that this kind of reduces the pushback about closed groups to say, yeah, we do have closed groups, and there are other opportunities for people to be involved in this conversation. One of the cool things that's happening is that as we head into 2025, ECLC and I had some good conversations, and we are going to be expanding this program because there's been a request for it. We think and a real need for it. So we're going to be actually operating 2 sessions each month, which means there will be, oh my gosh, every quarter there will be 4 closed sessions and 2 open sessions. We're going to be involving guest speakers into the open sessions, and I'm going to have a fantastic co-facilitator for the closed sessions that is not trans, that is Black, that is a woman. And I do that intentionally because she's fantastic, but also because I know it's important to provide different representation and voices and perspectives in our co-facilitation. So I really love to do that whenever I can. I do suggest that co-facilitators, whenever possible, are not like duplicates of each other. Make sure they're different in some ways. Okay. One of the things that felt really important to me is that when we got it off the ground in our first meeting and kind of every year, I help ensure that the members get to help guide how this operates. They help design the agreements. The only one that I said is an absolute must is confidentiality. So we'll talk about that in a second. They help pick out the topics, and they help design like the meeting structure and agenda. So confidentiality has been really, really important in this. And it is the thing that I'm the most of a stickler for. So it's very important that attendees don't disclose other attendees to anybody else. And we do our best not to even disclose that within a meeting. So I do my best not to indicate that somebody else has attended a previous meeting before. Or certainly not what they've shared in those meetings. I do report back to ECLC, but I don't report back names, even though my Zoom account is tracking those. People register for these. In the registration for the closed groups, I specifically ask, are you LGBTQ? And I have a very long description of that. And if somebody says no, I do not give them access to the closed group, but I recommend that they go to the open sessions. Thank you so much for wanting to be here for us. The best thing you can do is to give us this space. So ECLC knows the regions, like how many people from each region attended, but they don't have names or identifying information. For the open ones, we've been doing organizations, so they know what organizations are connecting with this program. From that, they can determine the regions as well. I welcome people to use chat, to use their headphones. Confidentiality issues may not be such of a big problem or a worry for some other affinity groups or ERGs, but it's a really important one for this group. So I want people to be able to participate in a way that works for them. And I also know that because of the way that we do this, some people can't attend due to their work environment, whether that's just really busy or it's at the wrong time, or they don't feel like it's a safe place for them to log on to these calls. So that is a downside to it. One of the things we're going to be doing with our 2025 schedule, part of why we're doing 2 sessions a month is that we will have one kind of in the morning like we normally do, and we're going to be doing some evening sessions as well. That allows people to choose and to have some more flexibility in the space they're in. And finally, a note is that we share documentation. We have like a Google Doc where they have my contact info. We put the dates of all the trainings. They chime in on topic ideas. I put in resources and announcements in there. So they all have access to that, and they promise, pinky promise not to share any of that information, any of the links anywhere else. I want to give you some quick examples of the topics we talk about so you can think about what you might use in your groups. So for our open topics this year, we talked about the relationship between sexism and homophobia. We had one called This or That, How Binary Approaches to Bodies, Attraction, and Gender Impact Us All. We did a fact check, myths and truths about LGBTQ youth. I did that because we were heading into the election and I heard so many myths happening out there and I wanted to make sure we were on point. And the one we're doing next week is essentially like okay, the election happened. What now? What are our next steps? Our closed topic sessions included conversations on passing and invisibility, and passing is in quotations here. We talked about common narratives such as like born in the wrong body or I've always known. We talked about our queer and trans elders and mentors and possibility models, which then actually led to our next session, which is the history and pain and power of the word queer. We talked about religion and faith. And then our last one was, it's election season. How are you doing? So those are some of the ones we did. I want to give you just as examples. And I'm going to drop a few more things into the chat here as we turn over to our Q&A session. So here are some good toolkits and templates that you can check out. And on the screen, and I'll put into the chat as well, complete with our hyperlinks. Here are the next sessions that I'm going to be leading for our LGBTQ plus discussion group. Our next Thursday is open to our aspiring allies. Again, we're going to be talking about like its election, what now, next steps, etc. And then our last LGBTQIA plus and questioning only one for the year will be in December 19th. And we haven't chosen a topic yet, but I will get there. So that's it. I know that's a lot of information, but I do encourage you to check out those other resources. I think those can be really helpful in giving you language to give to your employers, for example, about why these things can be powerful and important, and they can give you kind of a step-by-step guide. So thanks for your attention. Feel free to use that QR code that's on the screen. If you're looking to get in contact with me, you can start there. Thanks, Elijah.
Thank you. The pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much for just clarifying, giving us resources, giving us tools, strategies, and at least conversation starters to figure out how can we give our community members support in the ways that they need. So before we get into the Q&A, we don't have much time. I want to apologize ahead of time if we can't get to everyone's questions. We have quite a few. So before that happens, I want you to look through that chat, gather all the resources from Lyndon, click on the links, click on the buttons, have them loading, have them loading up, marinating, have them ready. As we also have our link for our survey. Please fill these out or at least have them set up somewhere so that you can complete them later. We don't want to have to bother you with excess emails. We'd rather you complete them while we are in session with the meeting. We need your feedback and your support to keep our learning cafes alive and running. If you want more sessions like the one here with Lyndon, we need your support. So fill out that survey link. Now, to get to the questions, Lyndon, we're going to be efficient as possible. We have one. It says, how do groups navigate different roles within affinity groups or ERGs, i.e., a colleague supervisor is in the group or the leader of the group also has other types of relationships with folks in the group in their regular work?
Oh. I'm going to say I think it's complex and complicated is the honest answer. I think the like confidentiality piece is important there, regardless of kind of what type of group it is, because we want people to not be bringing things back to supervisors in weird ways, right? If somebody has a complaint about something that's going on that's personal to them, we don't want that going somewhere else. Gosh, I wish I had some solid, like a solid answer for you. And I have to be honest that I don't, but I think that those toolkits do touch on that in there. I have also seen, I will say that some policies or guidelines have said that groups are only for like frontline staff or are not allowed, like senior management are not allowed to be a part of it, so that people can have more like confidential conversations. So they have rolled that into policies. And another way of doing that might be honestly similar to how like I do different open and closed groups with mine. People may agree within their group like, hey, every other month this one's available to our managers and this one's not, and so on and so on. So that might be a way of incorporating a variety of needs within that space.
Thank you so much, Lyndon. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the person who provided the question.
Yeah,
The next question we have, are these groups and group supports paid for by employers, or should
really
there
good
be
question.
additional funding sought out to keep the support of these groups going?
Fantastic. So yes, seek out additional funding. Sometimes the nonprofits, like you can get grants for these groups to run, because we know there are so many benefits to them. I'm going to say to my employers here, like, yes, absolutely. Please ensure that this is paid time. I will tell you that the Department of Labor laws around this are interesting. Some say like some stuff indicates yes, you really should be paying people for this time. You have to pay people for this time, and others say depending on the group, maybe not. So that is in some of the resources I gave you. But generally, like, yes, pay people for this time because they are doing something that enriches the organization. It's not just personal, right? ECLC, you right contract me because you know that doing that work is going to enhance your network and make for better organizations and retain employees. There's a real like business case for that. So you choose to put time and money into it. Um, it does mean that like employees should be given a little bit of time to attend things that are part of these groups, right? In particular, I will say for your people who are leading and facilitating these groups, again, I think throw that into their job description. Um, if you aren't going to pay everybody who does show up to an affinity group, please do pay your facilitators for it because they are definitely putting in extra labor to maintain it. Yeah.
Appreciate you, Lyndon. That kind of led into another question that we have on the list, and it says, what do you think is the biggest obstacle in helping leaders within the workplace or decision makers understand the link between social supports and productivity?
Oh. Um, I'm gonna my blunt way of saying this is like ask them how productive they are if they're having a bad day. Like if you can point out that like when employees are having a better time, when they are taken care of both at work and in their home life, they are going to show up in a better way at work for you, right? If I'm not happy with my employer, honestly, like I don't work as hard. I don't. So you're more likely to get more out of me if I have the ability to take care of my other needs while here. Um, I'm going to give just a quick anecdote because to me it feels very connected. Um, I was a firefighter EMT for about 10 years and a rock climber for like almost 30 years now. And I've taken so many classes on things related to like technical rope skills and rope rescue and all of these things. And I've noticed that like throughout my lifetime, I had a really hard time retaining the information for whatever reason, as good as I am at this stuff. Like I just had a hard time remembering like all of these details and things that I learned that are really important to safety. And last month, I went to a rescue skills workshop that was designed just for women and non-binary people and trans men. And I noticed I retained everything. I could teach you back that rescue skills class easily. I retained all of it. And I realized at the end of that day, it was because I could take away all of my other concerns. I didn't have to worry about fighting for a place at the table. I didn't have to worry about being talked over. I didn't have to worry about people like not letting me do things hands on. I could just focus on the skills. And I'm going to be a safer climbing partner because of that. That's huge. And so I really do think that translates here into the workplace. If people can get their other needs taken care of, or they can be in a space where they can just be themselves fully, they're going to work better for you.
Thank you for your honesty, your transparency in that, and just giving us an actual anecdote, a livable example of how that put into play to help you
Yeah.
focus on the things that were more important to retain. That's very insightful. We have one other question in the chat. I'm going to try to squeeze it in. It says, on that note, how would you handle confidentiality when it comes to staff being mandated reporters? There's a worry of folks wanting to come to an ERG or affinity group for themselves, but being a mandated reporter as a supervisor or leader.
Yeah. Mari, I really appreciate you asking that question. Um, So I think that is one of the like things that should be named in the, policy or agreements for a particular group. In the toolkits that I gave, not only does it talk about like how the organization needs to kind of exist around these things, but it also talks about how groups maintain and design themselves, right? What the structure of that is. And part of that, I think, is ensuring that there is an understanding um, of what the goal is for the group, like what are we intentionally talking about, but what happens if other things come up too. So name, this group does have mandated reporters, which means if we talk about XYZ, this is information that we have to follow up on. Um, whether that's about disclosure for the individuals present or that's disclosure about youth that they're working with. So disclosure is always key. The same thing that therapists do, right? They should be letting a young person know, hey, I'm Amanda Reporter. Here's what that means. You can talk to me about anything, but if you do talk about this, here's what I have to do with that information. So that people can make informed decisions about what they share in a group. It may mean they have to hold some things back because they are not ready for information to get reported somewhere else. But I'd much rather empower them to have a choice in that.
Lyndon, we appreciate you so much and our audience as well. Everyone, remember, learning is infinite. These are living ideas and strategies. We don't come here for perfection, but we do come here for progress. So we hope that you learned something new. Please don't forget to hit that chat link the survey link that's in the chat so you can grant us our feedback so we can keep things going. Until next time, please take care of yourself and more importantly, or as important, take care of one another. We hope to see you at another Learning Cafe in 2025. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all.